Welcome to the Rainbow Bull with Tim Volk from T. Volk and Company Consulting. In this podcast, Tim, a proud member of the LGBTQ community, discusses a range of topics around the 5 capitals of a flourishing family: human, intellectual, social, spiritual, and financial capital. Tim will use this framework as he and his guest experts delve into the secrets of the wealthy and how we might learn from them. So let's get started on this exciting adventure together. Why shouldn't same-sex couples plan a path forward for their wealth? You need advice as much as anyone else, so get with it and learn from advisors who share your life outlook. Tim Volk knows someone. Yeah, Tim, tell us about Ben Galloway.
So Ben and I have met and become friends over the, last year or so, right? I mean, you had read one of the papers I wrote and listened to the webinar we wrote on serving non-binary families, how to best serve the LGBTQ community, also known as non-binary. And Ben is a senior financial advisor as part of Greenspring's private client group. And his practice focuses on serving, through financial planning, business owners, executives, and things that are related to sudden wealth or intergenerational wealth transfers, meaning inheritance or how people pass their money forward. He also specializes in same-sex couples, is a member of the LGBTQ community, which I think is wonderful, and he's out and proud. So it's always fun to have people who are willing to speak to the community directly from first person. And I'm very excited that you're here. Welcome.
Thanks, Tim. Very glad to be here today.
We've spent a lot of time talking, and you and I were both talking about how it's kind of geeky, nerdy stuff to talk about financial planning, because most people's eyes are going to roll back over their head and go, oh, really? But I think it's such an interesting thing to create a path for people, a path forward. It gives peace of mind. It is valuable for families to have objective advice at all levels. And you have a roadmap. It helps everybody stay on point. I think it's always interesting, the clients, when I've worked with my advisory firms that are financial planners and we worked in their systems, I always found it fun to listen to the client meetings, and the clients focus on their number, if they're green light or yellow light or red light, if they're good, if they're saving enough, if they're on plan, and they get very into it. I just smile.
Yeah. Look, talking about finance is never a fun conversation to have. It's not usually a very exciting or sexy topic, but it certainly impacts everybody at some point in their life. So, and whether you're ready or not. And so it is pivotal to have conversations early and often in a relatable way. And it touches us in different ways. We all come to the table with different experiences. So if there's a way we can have these conversations and promote better financial literacy and a safe environment to ask questions and to know what our options are moving forward, ultimately it puts people in a great position. I was listening to your podcast last week, and Jill said something really interesting that I loved. She said that money's a magnifier and a tool. Yeah. And I think it's so true. Again, it's something that really can be used. It's not something to be feared, but we all really, we can't hand over the reins to anybody else when it comes to personal finance. And as much as we may like to, and maybe some of the reasons why I myself got into it, it's important that we can learn how to control, we can control, and get great advice along the way and great guidance along the way.
Well, I think it's all like the whole conversation with Jill about the relationship with money. It's a difficult thing. I think people are more likely to talk about sex than money, their money. And it's really funny because they don't want to talk about sex. So
No.
I just think that puts it into perspective. But I really, the more I got to know about you, I really would like you to give us your background, because you've got an interesting personal story that's led you to the work you're doing. You were born and raised in Baltimore?
Born and raised in Baltimore. I'm first generation Baltimore. My parents went to high school together in upstate New York in Albany, and came down here for work. And Baltimore was a growing hub between DC and New York. And we stayed here ever since. Oldest of 3, I have a younger brother and a younger sister. And I've been here ever since.
I always think of Hairspray.
Yes.
I was thinking the Broadway
I, li-
show
right,
and movie
I live,
Hairspray. Good morning, Baltimore.
right. I
So,
live
like,
15 minutes from that, from
see,
that area. Yeah, yeah, very close. Yeah, born and raised this area. I went to school in the Midwest. I was an athlete and an academic. Really
Mhm.
came from a pretty competitive environment. I was the oldest, and so there was a lot of expectation to succeed and achieve. I saw that around me. That was an appealing path, and I ultimately found myself at the University of Notre Dame and graduated with a degree in business. And
Wow.
yeah, that's kind of how I got started. And then
And
ultimately,
there's
con-
another
cons-
little and.
and considered a path to the priesthood, actually, to be a Catholic priest. I had been in Catholic school forever, and there is, I think, I hate to say it, it's very, I can sense a lot of relatability with other people who are gay, who are feeling a sense of being out of control with something that is maybe
Mhm.
seen as different and not good, quote unquote. So the priesthood was a path for me that was it was a way to follow rules. It was tradition uh, and a system that to me felt very comfortable. I felt comfortable with rules, felt comfortable with, with tradition. That was very appealing to me. And ultimately, I
Yeah.
grew up Catholic, so the values and the teachings really resonated with me. But I realized, with a little bit of perspective, that I was probably not addressing some pretty significant aspects of who I was personally, and was running towards something that I was possibly able to hide. So, of course, we've seen
Oh, wow.
major issues there too. But
I grew
so
up
I did a lot of
LDS. Did you
yeah,
know that I
right.
grew up LDS, which
I didn't know
I
that.
always think my friends that are Catholic, at least it was fun because they had all the beauty and pomp and circumstance and guilt and music. The choir is just, but the Mormon Church is very austere in
Hmm.
comparison. So
Hmm.
you had a lot of beauty in especially the funerals. Oh my gosh, there's a big
Yeah,
deal.
yeah. There was a lot of grandeur
Hmm.
and ritual. I think that the
That's the
aspect of a
ritual. Yeah.
ritual was comforting. And when I felt very out of control, I felt like I could lean into this area that
Yeah.
felt pretty secure and straightforward.
Well, I think the rituals actually are very powerful for you, a very powerful tool for the families. So my friends that are Catholic or Jewish, the rituals are very deep and rich. And there's other religions that have deep ritual, but I'm familiar with those two because I grew up with friends on both of those. And I feel as though the ritual provides, you know, a way to celebrate the different stages in life and to acknowledge the accomplishment and the growth of a person into adulthood.
Yep.
And that part of it is where I think, that it's been wonderful. I think there's been a lot of issues, but the idea of you being the priest is kind of fun. I like that idea.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it was a path that I was considering. Ultimately, not the right path for me, but I think there are aspects of it that I've certainly carried into my role as a certified financial planner.
Amen. But before the financial planning, you weren't going right into financial planning when you got out. When you decided not to be a priest, you decided you might be a doctor.
Well, close. I had a little bit of a background in medicine. I started off in college in pre-med and really
Wow.
loved medicine.
Wow.
Ultimately got out of that. Really, the only thing I like to say, I graduated with my degree through process of elimination. I did everything I did everything under the sun except engineering.
Wow.
So it was graphic design, business, finance, religious studies, architecture, and then ultimately had a stint in an acting class that ultimately took me nearly out of the country, but had an internship with Jimmy Kimmel right after college, which was really exciting.
Wow.
Yeah, and if you go back in the history books, you can see that I'm on TV. So I have made my appearance in front of the camera before.
So we have a
Um,
celebrity in the mix.
I mean, you do never know. Anything could happen these days.
Patrice and
But
I
yeah, I
didn't
did.
even know.
I did started a startup that went public here in Baltimore in mobile advertising. Kind of realized that probably wasn't the path for me, but it was an exciting route to take. And then got into medical device sales in the trauma space, specifically in orthopedics. So I was in the operating room advising surgeons and the tech staff and the nurses on trauma surgeries and joint replacement surgeries, ultimately at our top two hospitals, Johns Hopkins and University of Maryland Shock Trauma. So it was really intense. It was stressful. Obviously, you've got lives on the line, literally, and I loved every bit of it. I loved the intensity. I loved the medicine. I thought it was fascinating, but ultimately, similarly, I didn't quite have the impact I foresaw
wanting to have.
myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And that's ultimately kind of what led me into the world of advisory.
I think as you talk about it, it actually kind of makes sense. I think there was this calling that you felt of wanting to help others, and you were searching for the right platform. Well,
I was searching.
I think that's very commendable.
Yeah, thanks. I think it was, there were some pivotal moments when I was there, when I was in medical device, and really specifically a moment that sticks out to me was when I was entering the hospital. I had to pass the waiting rooms, and when you're at shock trauma, you're hearing car accidents, gunshots, knife fights. I mean, you're hearing some of the worst traumatic injuries that are changing people's lives in an instant. And I was seeing the doctors speak to the families and breaking hearts as I was walking past to surgery, and, watching organ donors, watching, again, lives just change in an instant. I realized that these people were about to begin a new life that they were not prepared for. And I wondered who was around them to support them in these big decisions that they were ultimately going to be faced with. So, especially financially.
And you noticed your parents had great advisors. That piqued your interest? Is that how it kind of got noticed?
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of a less severe experience, than the trauma center specifically. But yeah, my parents worked with an advisor when I was growing up, and that advisor included me in some of the meetings. And I didn't know what was going on, really. I had no context of what's going on, but I felt like it was really valuable that, one, my parents were willing to include me in some of those conversations early, and also that they were getting great objective advice as well, while they were making some of their biggest decisions in their 30s and 40s with, young kids as well.
I was one of those geeks that read the Wall Street Journal from the age of 12 or 13 every day. Still get it every day, still read it. And one of my friends from high school, she said once, "Tim, do you remember, we have so much in common?" And I'm like, "Why?" And she goes, "Because I read the Wall Street every day." And I said, "Oh." And she said, "Don't you remember? You were the only person in the school that read the Wall Street every day." And I was like, "Oh my God, I did that in junior high and high school." I was like, flashbacks. And then they're like, and then I'm like, she's also, I became financially independent because I paid attention and I invested well, and you got me very focused on that. And she was one of the people that would hang out outside and smoke weed. I don't know what we used to call them, like the druggies or something. And I said, "Well, Jackie, what did you do with your life?" And she says, "Well, I'm an electrical engineer. I designed the electrical systems for the space shuttle and the F-16s and fighters." And I'm like, "Oh." Yeah,
she picked up a lot from the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah,
then.
I'm in the financial services world. I don't think I've done quite anything. But I take a little credit in the positive there. But
yeah.
So you decided to make this pivot, right? You pivoted.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I pivoted, and it's funny how even what you just said about your friend Jackie, there are small moments that are pivotal when we think about kind of our history with our own finances. Or, again, something that Jill mentioned was that we all have our own money history, and these are the moments that we remember that are also very formative in how we make decisions throughout the course of our life, for better or for worse financially. Either we may continue in that path, or may divert completely and go in an opposite direction. These were conversations that were important to me. I saw my parents having, and it was not a divisive conversation between them. It was something that really brought them closer together and provided a lot of humility and compassion between them as they made decisions for their family. But I also realized my own experience in that I didn't enjoy this stuff. I really didn't. Finance and accounting were some of my least favorite classes in college, and I didn't do that well in them. But I didn't have any context. And I think that's one of the biggest factors here is we are looking through our own kind of microscope at different things. It's very hard to pull back a 30,000-foot view, understand how we fit in the world, but how we have to manage our own money and why. Looking 20, 30 years down the line
it's very hard.
So much harder than to say, what do I need to do to keep the lights on tonight or food on the table tonight?
That's right.
And anything else is a little less urgent.
Well, I think
until something happens, until something pivotal happens.
Right. The idea of the path, creating your own story. And I've written about, recently I wrote an article on DEI for family offices in one of their journals. And we talked about Jackie Merrow, one of my friends, she and Jay Hughes and Joni Bronfman wrote a paper 20-some years ago about fiscal inequality. But the exercise at the end I really liked is about creating our own mission individually for life, our vision and mission in our life, and then as a couple, if you're in a relationship with that other person. And I think that concept is what we do in financial planning. And obviously we could broaden it to life goals, in addition to that, because that's what people start to think about. But getting people to think down that path is difficult. I wanted to transition just to the rest of your background is just you're coming out, you're gay. I always think it's always funny when you get the question, when did you know you were gay?
Yeah, it's funny. It's hard to know what the time was when I didn't really know what that word meant when I was having the feelings, right? You don't really know how to define some of these feelings you're having young, right? I mean, ask anybody who's straight too. I mean, when were they starting to feel feelings for people? It could have been flirtatious, looks at somebody in school and they didn't really know what that was meaning. I guess I could have probably looked back at some of those things, but really it was not something I was ready for. Really to really face. Again, I gotta have my blinders on. I grew up in Catholic school in a rigorous competitive environment and being different,
focused.
Yeah. I mean, it was. I loved where I went to school. I loved all the places I went to school. I learned a ton. I have great relationships from them. I wouldn't change that at all. My story worked for me. And when I came out, I was ready. I would not have been ready earlier. And a lot of people feel differently. They came out way earlier than I did. I didn't come out until I was 24, about a year after college.
Wow. That's not that late, do you think? I mean, I versus our friends, I guess, that came out at 16 or 17 or 18, but I didn't have a clue. Yeah, I knew I liked, but I didn't know.
I was so afraid to even say that out loud or to even acknowledge that to myself. So I really didn't. I had my blinders on. And again, I wanted to focus on what I could control, which was academics, athletics, and my achievement there. I felt like no one could look at me and say, oh, you're different in this way, and that's bad. I didn't want that. I was so worried that in my head, that was the mindset was.
Right. Well, it's very common. It's actually very common amongst LGBTQ community as we're younger. We're so worried about having the conversation that we don't want to have. Right. About being
first
gay.
with ourselves.
Right. First with ourselves, and then to then have it discussed with other people. We go out of our way to excel in academics, to excel in sports, to be a top athlete, and to be a top whatever. You dress better, you're funnier, charming, perfectly fit body, beautiful fit, everything's perfect. Although I think that becomes an unattainable standard, but it does motivate us at a young age. It does provide a great impetus, I think.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's not uncommon, like you said, but it's extremely stressful
Oh,
to
yeah.
to try to distract people by not looking at this about kind of who you are down deep,
Hmm.
because that, I felt like I was so worried that my value and success hinged not on my uniqueness, but really on my sameness, which is, you know, I, 10 years out of college at this point, I have a lot more clarity than I did when I
Hmm.
was than even 10 years prior, before 20 years ago, when I felt like
Right.
everyone's looking at me and they're going to make fun of me for being different. And so what I need to do is blend in. And that was what I tried to do. And now I look back and I am encouraged and inspired by those who lean into their uniqueness, especially
Right.
if they know who they are at a younger age.
Sure.
Um, I just didn't have that example. I didn't feel like
But
I had somebody that looked like me. What I
no, I
knew
don't think
of
you're
the
alone in
LGBT,
that either. Yeah, I think,
no, right.
and then I think we face a lot of our own criticism, our own self talk.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and I don't think I've met a gay man that has great self esteem all the time. I think there's always people that are questioning our self esteem, and I'm sure
Hmm.
that's not just the LGBTQ community. I think it's a broader part of the
Totally.
world. But I think if we bring it back to
Mhm.
why is financial planning important for the LGBTQ community? Because you're passionate about that. You and I share that passion. And I
Yeah.
just wanted you to kind of hit the highlights. I know you had a couple stats here. Could you give us a
Yeah.
couple little highlights as to why you think it's important?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the importance of financial planning. I mean, planning in general for anybody is going to be important.
That's right.
And I would love to be able to speak to everybody. And the larger audience I can speak to, the better. That's great. But I know what it feels like to be part of the LGBTQ community. And so I can speak to that experience better,
Right.
and the unique needs that
That's right.
exist. And it's wonderful that marriage equality exists now, and that discrimination within employment benefits is now eliminated as well. That's really
That's
positive,
right.
but that doesn't mean that there aren't still very specific challenges to our community.
Mhm.
And it's not to be ignored. The LGBTQ community represents 10% of the American population. That is 33 million people, which is insane to think about.
Right.
And there's this thing called, that your listeners might have heard about, but this concept of pink money, which is
That's
the
right.
idea of the purchasing power of the global LGBTQ community, which is nearly $4 trillion
Yep.
globally. Now, within the U.S., that's around 1.5 trillion. Again, incredibly substantial. This is nothing to balk at. There's a massive business case to be paying attention to our community. Now, as it relates to personal finance, people have some here are three things that I think are going to be really
Okay.
important for people to be thinking about. It's going
Okay.
to be that peace of mind is top of mind, and people want their time back. They want to feel like they've got someone they can lean on, and ultimately some of the biggest concerns are also some of our biggest priorities. So
Okay.
that could be, you know that's really one where it's providing this peace of mind.
Peace of mind and top of mind. I like that. Let's leave that.
Peace of mind
Go
and
to
top of
number
mind.
two. What's number two?
Number two is that we face some steep financial barriers
Hmm.
that others don't, and that could be starting a family. I mean, the cost of starting a family, if you're conservatively, you're looking at about $250,000 from the jump. That could be surrogacy costs, gestational carriers, insurance, salaries, the
Yep.
hospital visits, and then that in addition to egg donors, and if you are then considering foster care or adoption, there are massive hurdles. So
That's
starting a
right.
family is a massive financial component to be thinking about. The other one, retirement and caregiving for LGBTQ folks is often much higher. There's a study from Sage USA that came out that said LGBTQ people, they're twice as likely to live alone in senior years, which promotes this idea of social isolation epidemic of loss, which is terrible. And I want to say that again, twice as likely to live alone, half as likely to have a partner, and 4 times less likely to have adult children. I mean, it is a completely different outlook for people in the LGBTQ community than what you may expect for those we may see around us who have children, who have a partner or a spouse, not even to mention the discrimination that LGBTQ folks could see in assisted care facilities.
Oh my God. We talked about it with Arden O'Connor in that episode, you remember, a couple of months ago, where it's a big issue and we don't have very many that are LGBTQ approved. I know that there's been an index. Sage is really working hard to try and turn the tide. I'm on a new committee where we're creating, the concept is called the Legacy Project, and I'm hoping we get you involved. And it's the idea to help advisors around the country and LGBTQ wealth owners to help create legacy in their giving into a larger bucket that can then be filtered to the 100 or 200 LGBTQ nonprofits around the country that serve the community. But the primary emphasis is also on our aging, because it's a huge, huge problem. So
it's a huge problem,
I think financial planning in general, one of the things you and I would talk about is that one of the barriers that's part of this for successful financial planning is the long-term care and the ability to be able to afford that. So I think financial planning is a critical part of that. I mean, I think if we don't have that plan for, it could be disaster.
It could be. And especially outside of financial planning, the estate planning is
really important.
Equally, if not more important than how you manage your current assets. It's what happens if something happens to you and the state is deciding what happens to your
You need to make sure you decide what goes on.
That's what
the estate plan does.
Yeah, and really bulletproofing that and making sure that you are working with an attorney, with a CPA team, an accountant, and an advisory team that understands those nuances, and that they're all working together on your behalf, because there are circumstances that need to be accounted for, and they really can't be ignored.
I noticed that we talked about that the LGBTQ community is less likely to use the financial planning tools. Retirement, non-retirement savings. You and I both talked about the life insurance, and I'm now becoming. I've been in insurance on and off my whole life, but I recently, over the last couple of years, have learned that the insurance industry has pivoted and created the ability to have long-term care riders on your life insurance, where you can use the death benefit for long-term care. It also gets referenced as a terminal illness or critical illness, but it really has become a better way to access long-term care insurance and a hybrid life insurance policy than it is to buy the standalone. But you can still buy the standalone, and sometimes they offer it as group coverage in your benefit package, which is, again, but I really believe that I just found it interesting when you say that we're not as likely to access all these tools.
Hey, sorry for the interruption. Look, I know you're listening to the Rainbow Bowl podcast, and I'm really happy you're here. But if you have any questions or issues you'd like to have us discuss with the experts, please email them to us at tim.volk@tvolkco.com. We would love to hear from you.
Right. And you make a great point there on different kinds of options. One of the things we want to make sure people are aware of is that they know what their options are before they feel that they're backed into a corner or forced to make a decision. We often make not the most ideal decision when we are making hastily decisions. When we're kind of backed into a corner, we often don't make the best decisions.
That's right.
So if we can plan accordingly, know what the options are, and whether it's insurance, whether it's different kinds of investment vehicles, and whatever that may look like.
Idling the assets, estate planning part of it. Yes, right. That's what.
Yeah, there are a lot of tools to use. And so again, you don't have to know what they all are, but it's helpful to set some micro goals to say, I'm going to at least set the meeting, or I'm going to look into these things and have these mile markers kind of checked off on your own calendar. It really can help you block and tackle really well. So, but you make a great point too about the how we're less likely to use the financial planning tools. The debt-free guys who also on the Queer Money podcast ran a study with the Motley Fool, and they've gathered incredible data that has otherwise really not been made available or present or really measured. And some of the things they found were less likely to use financial planning tools, including retirement, non-retirement accounts, insurance, and estate planning. Second, we're more likely to have debt from non-appreciating assets. That's student loans, credit cards, personal loans, which often are more financially burdensome versus debt that can generate wealth, or debt for appreciating assets like a mortgage. Again, much of that comes down to lifestyle. So we have to be mindful of that.
I think our friends over it, and I want to do a shout out to the debt-free money guys who have the Queer Money podcast, right? And they are really about being debt-free. And they're really about everybody being financially stable. But they're really focused on the gay community because the LGBTQ community. And forgive me, you guys, sometimes I interchange that just for simplicity, but I don't mean to any leaving anybody out. But the idea would be that there's a Christian network that is doing a very good job through the various religious institutions to help create financial stability in their members and to help them then put money aside and invest it. And then some of that money gets donated into a larger pool and there's a group of Christian advisors. I think it's called the Kingdom Advisory Network, right?
Yes.
And they are also funding a lot of the anti-LGBTQ legislation and candidates from all levels, from city councils to state to national scene. So, but the concept we've been talking about amongst the group is to create a rainbow network of advisors that we know that are LGBTQ, just to help our community and to speak to us in a more relatable way.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's a great idea. Again, there's a lot of PTSD that we bring to the table. Again, a lot of people do also who are not LGBTQ plus, but again, directly speaking to our community, LGBTQ
and our
people,
allies,
yes, and our allies, right? Yeah. There's a lot we bring to the table that has impacted how we've made decisions so far. We risk losing those that we love the most at the precise time that we're ready to be most vulnerable. I mean, it is incredibly, it's so significant. So if we can align with people who understand that can say, I hear you, I know where you're coming from, and let's start working on these things together. It's going to be really important. Again, the best day to start would have been yesterday. The second best is today, and it doesn't have to all be done at once. There's no way it can be. Exactly. It's never too late. And it's one of the best gifts you can give yourself and those that you love.
I think Patrice has got a good question. Is the LGBTQ community reluctant to go to an advisor because they're afraid of having to talk about their lifestyle? And I think specifically that's what we're saying, right? I think that is, we're really calling it out. You and I are willing to say, look, we want to serve all of our clients, and we will work very hard to serve all of our clients.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's a bit of an EQ element here, the emotional quotient that we are a little more attuned to than some others because of what you just termed as like the trauma or PSTD that we have bringing to the table. So maybe we're just open to hearing people's stories, their fears, their frustration. I don't know.
Yeah. Or I don't want to have to tell you some of the things that I've gone through because I just want to talk to somebody, because I'm already going to talk to you about heavy things already. My finances are not fun conversations to have. It's like walking into a doctor's office. How often are you walking into a doctor's office or a lawyer's office for a good thing? So there's already a lot of anxiety coming in. So, there's a lot of that. I mean, I've got somebody who just reached out to me from across the country that said, I've been looking for an advisor who serves the LGBTQ plus community, who is also part of the community, but you guys are very hard to find. There are not many of you out there.
No,
if we can create a safe space where people say, I don't want to have to ask, are you LGBTQ plus friendly? I'm almost outing myself before I even know you, and I have no idea how you're going to react. You could you could say, I don't work with that community, or I'm not comfortable with that. And I've basically said that's who I am though, and that now I'm feeling kind of rejected. So if there is a way to
adding to your PSTD.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Right.
and what's really interesting, so the debt-free guys in the Motley Fool in their study, it found that 55% of gay, lesbian, and bisexual people have been discriminated against in the financial services industry. That number jumps up to almost 75% for trans people. And so again, are people reluctant to work with advisors or to talk to people about their money? Absolutely. Because they've already seen some negative slant.
But don't you think we could also put women in that category in some ways? Because I can't tell you the number of times that, I've been in the office where I watched women were not listened to. They weren't asked the questions. They were not, that was a more male dominated room, male dominated piece. So
there are a lot of women who are financial decision makers or decision makers for the household. To not consider that is an oversight. And if it's a matter of changing some language with how we're addressing people based on how they would like to be addressed, it's not that big of a lift, and it can make a world of difference.
I think it's important. You and I are both CFP, Certified Financial Planner, designated or earned the designation through all of our studies. One of the roles we play that I think is really important to explain, and there's a lot of advertising on this, which is, the concept of fiduciary. I'll give you a little story there. One of my roles in my previous engagement was to help run all the marketing and sales and create a plan on our marketing and branding and the newsletter and everything. And I talked about the importance of fiduciary. And so one of the people that we had that was helping us do the writing is was a really neat lady, older, had been in the news media in her whole career, candid, also a client, and said, well, let me understand this. Fiduciary means you're going to do the right thing. I'm like, yeah. She said, so I don't think it's a good idea that you're telling people that you have to do the right thing, because as I gave you the money, I'm assuming you're going to do the right thing. So it actually bothers me that you have to talk about this.
Yeah.
I fell out. I never thought of it because we get so focused in our own terminology in the industry.
Right. Such a funny word too. Fiduciary. Are you a fiduciary?
Fiduciary?
And to have
Explain
to say,
it. Tell us what it is.
Yeah, I promise that I'm doing what's in your best interest. Again, I would hope that anybody I'm working with would do that. Unfortunately, that's not how the rules are set up. And so, So
people are shocked to learn that, right? They're shocked to learn that up until recently, we didn't have to do what was in your best interest. Although I know a lot of people in the industry, and I mean, 90, I don't know what the percentage is, 95% do the right thing all the time. I don't know what the percentage of bad apples is, but
yeah, absolutely. And there's some people who are breaking laws and they're getting caught for it, which they should, but you don't, most of the time people are making decisions in their client's best interest. And if they get paid for that, for some of those decision making or the products that they put people in, that is certainly not against the law, but it is good for people to know what they're paying, the value they're getting for what they're paying for, and to know how their advisory team is getting paid. Those are all valid
very
questions that people can ask.
It's a conflict of interest.
Ask.
In the really wealthy families that we serve, the conflicts of interest are very clearly spelled out. There's a lot of legal ramifications to it. It's spread now throughout the industry, but for a very long time, there was a question about how are you being compensated, and it sounds like a very simple question, but you would be shocked at the number of people that it's really conflict exists. There's a conflict that exists when they're trading the money, actually purchasing the stock, selling the stocks, or buying the private equity deal and getting paid by the private equity firm for placing the private equity deal. Or, so the way fees are being paid, I think it's so powerful to have that.
Yeah, and it's confusing, right? I mean,
totally
it's
confusing. So
it's confusing, and it's nice to be structured in a way that when you're walking in the door, the way the firm is set up, you're already
clear.
they're already clear. You're already
Yeah.
protected before you
Yeah.
even start talking to us based on the way we're structured. And that's there are a lot of like people like that, but others that aren't. But it's just know to ask the right questions, and that's an easy Google search too. What questions should I be asking my advisory teams? They are important, and that matters for for everybody, for any income level, but also especially the wealthy families that you're working with, and the family offices and the businesses of families. It is crucial, especially if there's really complicated, difficult family dynamics
That's right.
that have been pervasive throughout either governance decision making or generational dynamics, and many times we see in kind of more of a patriarchal family office setting, it can be really difficult to have some of these conversations. So to align with some trusted advisors is going to be.
Well, I also want to bring up a really important point that I think it's important for our listeners who have the expectation that they may inherit money, but they have a great job and they may have a habit of living in the moment, meaning beautiful Armani sports coat, or I really like this little trip. I'm going to run over to Barcelona for the weekend. So
for the day.
And it's easy to do, but we do have some responsibilities here. I'm a believer that the money can disappear.
Absolutely.
And the money may not get to you in the way that it's all originally planned, or the inheritance plan or the estate plan that you may be a benefactor to. So wouldn't it be a good idea for us to create our own plan as well, to have our own backup plan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't count on something that hasn't happened yet. And if you do, you're setting yourself up to potentially be disappointed or completely caught off guard. So it is critical to make sure, I encourage my clients to get with their estate attorney and host family meetings with their attorneys and their families, even if it's not very complicated. But talking about the transition plan over time, it's certainly not a death wish. Talking about estate planning does not mean that you are going to die. Getting insurance today doesn't mean you're going to die tomorrow. Putting your seatbelt on doesn't mean you're going to get into a car crash. But of course, you want that airbag to be there if something does happen. You are protecting yourself and making sure that your estate work is in order. And there are some, there are some priorities that need to be taken into consideration first. Wills, medical directives, powers of attorney.
You know what I think we could do? Maybe we should
like
create a list for everybody that we could attach to the podcast, where we have just a little reference list. It's part of being a CFP anyway. I mean, there's just sort of some basic things that you want people to think about before they'd even call you or, come see us. Right. So is there anything that's a key moment, or like aha moments in your work, or that you've had?
Yeah, it's funny. I guess before I started in the world of advisory, while I was still, I kind of mentioned it before, but when I saw these people's lives change, when I was in those waiting rooms and walking past, and I mean, just devastated. And I felt like, you know what, I want to be there when people don't know what to do or who to hang on to in a time like this, in a time of big crisis. My family had gone through some things like that in our own past, and we really relied on our trusted network around us. And so seeing that was really, really critical. And actually another point was when I already was an advisor, I was in my CFP review course, and we were almost at the tail end as I was about to sit for my exam itself.
Nightmare. Go on.
Yeah. It was brutal. It was the hardest test I ever took. But it was this moment where our teacher was saying, you know this, you deserve to pass this test. You've put in all of this time. You have a ton of clients that you're working with and who are trusting you and relying on you. And previously, I'd had some imposter syndrome, right? I felt like I needed to know everything.
I
And what I've
do.
learned is that humility really creates trust. And if you don't know the answer to everything, that's okay. And anyway, sitting for this right before this test, I completely broke down. I was completely emotionally, mentally drained, sitting for one of the hardest tests, a pivotal moment in my career.
Oh my
And
God.
and I just felt like, you know what, this is the confidence boost that I have been needing. I do feel qualified. I know what I'm talking about, and it feels good to then lean less on being technically perfect and instead connect to the person I'm talking to, because that's going to be the most important thing here.
Amen. I think that's the number one part of this. I think the test for when I took it was a day and a half, almost 2 days worth of tests. And then I remember one point I panicked because I couldn't calculate a mortgage. Now, mind you, I was running the director of mortgage operation sales for Harris Private Bank for years, and my family owns a mortgage company. So I'm like, okay, I panicked. That showed the anxiety level we all have during that test. I think there's a similar anxiety level for our clients when they come in to talk to us about their finances, because they're really bearing their soul. What is it that you would like to say to the clients that you can't really say normally? What would you say to them if you couldn't, because you can't maybe be able to say it when you normally meet?
Yeah, you know what? I've really shifted, and this is something I do want to say to them, and I do say it when they come in the door. It's, you are here for a reason. What are you bringing to me today? What is it that is top of mind that you are most concerned about? Let's address that fear, where it's coming from, why, and let's come up with a plan that makes sense. It's not, what is my solo 401k? Should I be structured as an S Corp? Am I taking the right deductions? It's usually a pivotal moment that has brought them to the table. Let's talk about how that feeling first, and we'll figure out the technical piece later.
You're so good. You're so good. You're so good. Patrice, don't you want to just call him every day?
You can.
There is one thing that I want you guys to address in part 2, whenever you're going to do it, is EQ. You guys talked about it very briefly, but Ben, I think you touched on several areas where a discussion of EQ versus IQ would be insightful.
I think we should do a follow-up. I think it'd be good to do a follow-up podcast about some of the technical things about financial planning that are very helpful that we've all learned, and some of the tricks that we've learned. I was saying, the hybrid life insurance, that's actually relatively new, and it's really ideal for all of us who are, don't have children, because who's going to help take care of us? And then, what we're doing in this work is really helping families look at risk and make sure that we're organizing it in a way to be as efficient and help to mitigate risk and to help make sure there's liquidity when we need liquidity. I mean, and that peace of mind, I don't even know how we share or describe what that means for families when they feel that. It's pretty,
and it's also distilling
empowering.
Complex things down to something that's a lot more simple. I take that from my trauma days. I was advising surgeons on products to put into, a broken, destroyed pelvis, right, from a car accident, and I have to explain that in very simple terms without touching anything in the OR to the scrub tech who English may be a second language for them. And so I am trying to communicate at very different levels. And I brought that into my world here in financial planning, where I know what I'm talking about, but jargon doesn't help the person on the other side of the table. How do you distill something complex into something much more simple? And you can do that.
Thank you very much for being with us today.
You're so welcome. I've loved being here. I'm so energized. I love talking about this. I love talking to you and Patrice, and I look forward to doing it again.
You're welcome back. We'll have you back soon. And Patrice, would you like to help us bring it home?
Sure will. But first, Tim, you've got to tell people how they can reach you, and maybe Ben too.
Sure. You can reach me by way of email. That'd probably be best. My email is ben.galloway, Ben.Galloway, that's Ben.Galloway at greenspringadvisors.com, just as it sounds. Ben.Galloway at greenspringadvisors.com. And please reach out. I'd love to.
And
to
if you can't remember all that, you can reach out to me and I'll happy to connect you at tim.volk at tvolco.com or on our website, tvolco.com, or if you want to just call us at 312-636-5855, you can. Thank you. This has just been a delight.
Yep.
All
Thanks,
right,
all.
folks. Follow this podcast. I tell you every time. Why not? There's so much in these podcasts. Just listen to Ben. Share it with others, too. I'm Patrice Sikora, and thanks for being with us. Thank you for listening to the Rainbow Bull Podcast. Visit our website at www.tvolco.com or give us a call at 312-636-5855. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of T. Volk and Company Consulting. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.